right, we'd like to call this meeting of the West Allis West Milwaukee School District to order, please. If we could please rise for the pledge. And Mr. Lee, would you please lead us?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. If we could do the roll then, please, Suzette.
Mr. Ustra.
Here.
Mr. Keller.
Here.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Sikich.
Present.
Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
Ms. Klug.
Here.
Mrs. Justum.
Here.
President Emmons.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do you have any changes or modifications to tonight's agenda, Dr. Lexman? No, okay, he says no. All right, we will then move on to item 6 this evening, our public comments. If you do have public comments, we do remind you that you have up to 3 minutes to address the board. Please make sure you give us your name and your address for the record. And a reminder that we do not debate or respond during public comments, but rather you'll get a response after this meeting. Anyone here tonight for public comments?
Yes, Dan Golomsky, 3115 South 106th Street.
Thank you, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, so thank you everybody for letting me present, or at least give you my thoughts. I wanted to ask for West Allis School District to give some reconsideration to moving the Hale soccer boys season to spring. I'll go through several reasons why, but the WIAA approved play, our Greater Metro Conference, which is Hale's conference, is playing this fall, and the Wisconsin Youth Soccer Association has moved to phase 3, which is a full training and full competition with guidelines. Additionally, the decision was made without parents, students, and coaches being part of that process, is my understanding or belief. We have no guarantee that the circumstances in spring will be any different than they are today. Although soccer is a contact sport, it is not football, and that should be clear. I understand some state colleges have moved their season, but this was not because they could not keep the players safe on the field. This was a result of the inability for them to control the student population on campus. There are solutions with playing soccer, social distancing, mask wearing, hand sanitizing, washing, and taking temperatures are just a few of them. Masks can be worn as soon as athletes leave the field and on the sidelines. They can even be worn on the field. Soccer contains 22 players and 11 from each team, spread over 21,000 square feet. By definition, this sounds like social distancing. This can be done in a manner that is monitored and adjusted to make safe for all involved. I have been informed that volleyball is being allowed to use or learn to manage athletes during this health emergency. This is an indoor sport and does not support corrective actions for sports that have a level of contact. Any information collected from this will not help for a basketball season or any other sport that has contact in the future. Soccer would provide you with some insight into that opportunity. Our other organizations have already established safety protocol for soccer that our district is unwilling to recognize. This is truly, if you truly evaluate the information, you would recognize that others have already addressed this and have concluded that moving forward is possible. My son has participated in soccer all summer, including campuses at universities without incident. There are solutions available. In my opinion, we are letting an opportunity to advance West Allis go to waste. Other schools are facing the exact dilemma and have embraced the opportunity to move forward. Yet, West Dallas is choosing a course of action that is not progress. Not to mention, moving soccer to spring will result in my sons and other players not being able to participate because of club commitments. I realize the decision was made without consideration of all the facts or desire to find a solution. So I'm asking the district to make a reconsideration on this matter.
Thank you very much. Do we have other public comments this evening?
Yes.
Yes, okay, your name and your address, and please for the record.
Yes, this is David Ingold, 1527 South 85th Street in West Dallas. I was reading in the Washington Post and the New York Times about the concept of pod learning, where as near as I understand it, it looks like teachers can teach to, instead of to individuals in their homes, the groups, it could be groups of very small groups of perhaps 2 or 3 children in individual homes in the same grade. And I see an advantage. There's provides broadband access for those who don't have broadband access. It can lead, and the teachers can teach to the pods rather than to individuals in their individual homes. And there's I guess the children can have their individual devices, but at least gives the children too a chance to have some social interaction. And it seems to be easier to cohort kids in these pods rather than in classrooms. It seems to be a smaller group, and teachers can concentrate on the pods that need more attention. I can see one of the disadvantages I see is transportation, or to parents to transport them their own children to the different pods and different homes. And you may need to switch around homes based on parent schedules or work schedules and something like that. And then one other advantage, I guess, there are some apartments might be too small to accommodate other children. But anyway, it looks like something to look into as teaching to smaller groups and to keep the spread of COVID-19 down.
Thank you. Do we have other public comments this evening? Do a little search here. All right, then we will move on to item 7, our superintendent's report. Dr. Lexman.
Great, thank you. Let me get to that part of the agenda quick here. So we'll start with 7.1, legislative update. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is to do with the statutory flexibility that school districts are seeking, and the School Administrators Alliance has led the charge, and we submitted a letter in support. So the big categories are broad flexibility and teacher and professional staff licensure, essentially providing for a short term some flexibility on being able to use a teacher that's licensed in one area to cover a different area, or to teach in a different area where maybe they're comfortable but not formally licensed. And that kind of flexibility will be helpful, especially if we go through periods of where classrooms are closed or sections of schools are closed when we start bringing kids back to school. The ability to use retired teachers. And so retired teachers that right now they have to have a gap in service before they can come back, and then they're limited to the number of hours. So to waive those things for the time being, again, it creates flexibility for us. Pupil counts, so essentially asking that we would be able to use either last year's count or this year's count, or school districts, not just us, last year's count or this year's count, whichever would be higher, and that would definitely be in our advantage in terms of determining general aid. Transportation aid, again, using count from the previous year, knowing that many districts, in fact most, are declining enrollment. So this helps most districts in the state. This one, immunity from civil liability for schools, has come up a number of times. It's been proposed in federal federal legislation. And so to provide school districts and employees from immunity from civil liability regarding if a child gets exposed to COVID-19 at school, or an employee does through actions of another student, so that there would be immunity for employees. Student assessments, so the SAA, and we're supporting this as well, suspending student assessments for the year. If we want to focus on doing school well and safely, and that's different than when we have kids regularly every day, 5 days a week, and we focus on also being prepared for the high stakes assessments. Suspending the school report cards again, so that's the performance report, so that was number 7. Open enrollment space determination that would allow districts to reset available space. And what's happening behind the scenes on that one is there are a number of families now where in school districts that are uncomfortable with the return to school plan, meaning their kids are going to be going back face to face. And some of those families are now starting to enroll in virtual charter schools across the state because you don't have to be nearby to attend a virtual charter school, which opens seats in districts that are losing those students. So the desire to recalculate and provide additional open enrollment seats. And then potential use of funds in our long-term capital improvement trust fund, or Fund 46. And maybe that would open up dollars on a temporary basis to help cover costs associated with running schools within this environment. And there are no federal updates at this time. And then going to 7.2, which is district recognitions. And there's a long list of secretaries there. I'm not going to read all the names, but I do want to point out of what we're focusing on here is really just a special thanks to all the staff here that are working to launch and process online registration using Skyward for our families. And this is the very first time. And the fact that, we're trying to, or not trying to, we are launching school all virtual and trying to help support good habits and social distancing. We've launched online registration for the first time. We'll continue it going forward, but in particular, I want to thank in our technology areas, Mike Throon, Fron Tenuta, and Don Nardi, who's in the copy center, but also really helping get the word out. And then every single secretary in the schools that is helping oversee and process all of this. And so our secretaries have become truly essential workers during this time to help us get this, up and on its feet. And families are participating and taking advantage of it. And then also big thanks to Suzette Zimmerman, who's the executive assistant to the superintendent and the board, who's been supporting this, Tess and communications, and of course Beth Kaler, who's really took the lead on this effort. And so this will be a success because of all of these people, but we also still have, the paper pen form of doing registration and forms and fees. And for families that need it, they can call their school. There'll be a packet available. And so we're trying to accommodate as many as family needs as possible, but at the same time, really focus on what is really good practice to support getting kids back into school and stopping community spread. So this is one more of the strategies. And then going on to 7.3, some updates from me. And so first, a little bit of a focus on fall athletics, because we did get some email responses and anticipated this. These are difficult, unpopular decisions that need to be made. We need to move forward in some areas so we keep our focus on school. But and it's true that there wasn't broad input from coaches or parents of athletes, because it's very clear what they would support, and there's many other factors that are being considered here. But input has been received from athletic directors, from our school leadership teams. I've been speaking with other superintendents, both within the Woodland and the GMC. But most importantly is really the recommendations that we've been consistently following from our health department. And that is generally we're focusing on what is happening in West Allis, West Milwaukee, and within Milwaukee County, because those are the two communities where most of our families live. And we include Milwaukee County health, the city of Milwaukee health information, but Milwaukee County health metrics, because we also have, employees that live in all parts and even in other counties, but in all parts of Milwaukee County. And we have about 1,000 students that join us from the city of Milwaukee. So it's a balancing act in terms of what the metrics are telling us and what's the most reasonable direction to head. So some of the things that are in the mix here is our health department actually recommended against athletics, period. Now, that didn't seem entirely reasonable, and I think it's important for us to try on parts of how we run, the organization, and including athletics, as we learn to bring kids back to school. And so we tried to find a path that included low-risk sports, and then what are the next steps. I felt it was important to keep the two high schools aligned, and even though some parents have suggested, well, let the conferences decide, and whatever they decide if we're different, but we're one community. And I think we should move together in some of these kind of situations. It's also important that we implement an option around athletics that's reasonably consistent with our returning to school plan. And even though there've been a lot of conversations with superintendents, and I agree that on its face, it seems very contradictory to start all virtual learning and have any form of athletic participation at all. But again, what's reasonable, what's the way we can balance some of that also has to be considered. So we try to find a way that it is reasonably consistent with our plan. In the Woodland Conference, they're very much leaning against soccer and football, the high risk sports. The Woodland did, in consensus, and I supported it, agree to host volleyball competitions with the mask requirement as kind of one step to try to balance opportunities for kids. In the GMC, there's been less conversation there, but I speak with superintendents regularly, but it should be noted that Divine Savior Holy Angels and Marquette High School are both within the city of Milwaukee, and they cannot, according to the city of Milwaukee regulations, participate in high-risk athletics. So those two schools are out, and we've made that same decision independent of the city of Milwaukee, obviously. And so that idea of supporting volleyball is really defined what's a balanced opportunity, and making the decision now about football and soccer also then might allow some of our fall athletes in those sports to consider the other low-risk sports or volleyball as a way to continue to participate in athletics. And as I shared with our returning to school committee, on either direction that we end up going is going to be wrong. So that there's risk on both sides. There's risk if we don't have students participate in soccer and football, because for some kids, that's why they come to school. And I hate that decision we're making puts them at risk for potentially not participating in athletics and school. But there's also, I think, a significant risk given our health metrics that we will contribute to community spread through athletics and further delay our opportunities to get kids back in school and to keep them there. And so either way, I'm going to be wrong. And so what I decided to do is lean on the side of what is least risky to our overall plan and our overall goal of getting kids back to school. And that has to be the larger focus. It is also likely, and we talked about this quite a bit this morning with the GMC superintendents and Brian Henson, that some of the schools that are moving forward with participating with high-risk sports, they're going to have disease spread that's tied to athletics and competitions or practice. And then those students are going to be told to quarantine. And if they're at schools that have face-to-face instruction already, there's going to be impact on school and classrooms and potentially the entire school. And some of those schools may then decide not to continue with the high-risk fall athletics and move entirely to the spring. Because what WIAA has set is if you participate and complete 50% of your season, then your season is done if you can't continue because of quarantine and those kind of things. So some schools will then likely opt to say, let's not risk it. Let's see if we can get a full season for our kids in the spring. So we're anticipating that some of that is probably going to happen as well. And so, so the bigger, thing that I'm really trying to balance out is what's a path that helps us implement our returning to school plan. So once we get kids there, we can keep them there. And I think this was reasonable, not not one that makes people happy. And like I said, no matter which direction we go, I'm going to get it wrong. But it's a reasonable path given our larger goal, and I think it's somewhat balanced. So that's kind of the thinking behind the decisions around high-risk sports. And then more broadly in our returning to school plan, we are still working in the background on the website and on the combined document that will describe in more detail. And that was really based on the presentation we shared with the board last week. We will have, photos of what classrooms will likely appear like for distance learning in particular. So when we hit that phase called distance learning, we have the best opportunity for good social distancing in schools. It's less likely as we get to the 4 and 5 days, because then more and more kids are coming back, but hopefully by then we're in a much better place in terms of our health metrics. And so a reminder, and as soon as we're confident with the information in the website and the larger kind of PDF web-based document, that we'll announce when that's going to go live. We don't have that date quite set yet, because so much of it, the information is really detail about when kids start coming back to school. And we know that that's several weeks, if not more, in front of us. But a reminder, we are starting all virtual on September 8th. And our teachers are working and planning now to make sure that what we deliver is not emergency teaching or virtual learning, but enhanced. And then also device materials, and even the PTA Unity shirt distribution plans are all set at each school site. So if you're curious about when yours is, it really is communication coming directly from the school site. And then last, on facility planning. So the administrative planning team recently met with Bray and C.D. Schmidt, and it was really a discussion around what kind of parameters we think are important for them to consider as they start to build scenarios that would help us kind of build our facility master plan. One of the obvious ones is, and we've talked about this at length for months, is we need to be operating the right number of buildings for the number of kids we have and are likely to have in the future, right? So right now we operate way more square footage than we need to for the number of students we serve. That we talked about, are there different grade level configurations we would consider? And so just trying to balance elementary enrollment, so we don't have elementary schools that have 180 kids and some that have 500. And in doing so, is there a solution by going to K-8 schools? I'm not suggesting we're going to K-8 schools. This is the part of the process where we think broadly about what the options are and what scenarios might help respond to the challenges around our facilities. And then we have a meeting coming up this week that we're going to get some feedback from them and give them some additional input on, are they on the right track for starting to build some scenarios, and at some point then that starts to come back to the board and then goes out to the larger community committee. And so I wanted to touch on facility planning again, because it's one part of our work right now that is proceeding, maybe not quite as quickly as we had hoped, but it is part of the larger work we've committed to in our strategic plan. And so that is going on, and it should be. And so with that concludes the superintendent's report. Stephanie, I see Jeff raising a hand.
Had to unmute myself. Just a point of information, Dr. Lexman, about an hour ago, Milwaukee Public Schools suspended all fall sports indefinitely.
Okay. Yep, I was not aware of that, but thank you for that note.
It just came through on a flash on my phone on an update, but I thought you were talking about how we're doing it. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the board president's report and taking a look at the board calendar. Today, August 24th, we have a regular Board of Education meeting, and immediately following that, we will have a financial stability and efficiency workshop, facilities update. On Monday, September 14th, starting at 6 o'clock, we do a regular Board of Education meeting, and immediately following, another financial stability and efficiency workshop, this time our public hearing. On Monday, September 21st at 6 o'clock, we have a workshop, employee engagement and culture workshop on Title IX. On Monday, September 28th at effective a regular Board of Education meeting. Any board members have any community updates?
Those of you that are familiar with me and the school board, I'm a member of the West Allis West Milwaukee Monogram Organization. We're a group of about 20 individuals that only have 2 fundraisers a year, but we provide between $10,000 and $12,000 in scholarships to Hale and Central. We normally have our main fundraiser, the chicken roast, in June, but obviously because of the COVID, none of the chickens wanted to turn out, so we had to postpone it until September. And September 19th is the new date. And because where we used to do it because of the COVID, we cannot cook our chickens there, but because we donate so many to the VA, it's going to be held at the Greendale American Legion post. I do have tickets available that are $12 a piece. You can buy them for yourself and go over and pick up the dinner, or you can purchase them and have them donated to a vet at the VA or other veteran facilities. And if you are interested in that, give me a holler and I will make sure I get in touch with you. Thank you.
Would you be willing to send that out in an email to the board so we had all the details so we can share that as well?
Sure.
Great, thank you. Then we're not mixing up data. We have your words for it.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other board members with any other community updates? All right. We will then move on to item 9 this evening, our consent agenda. There are 4 items. Item 9.1, the approval of the minutes from August 10th, 2020 regular Board of Education meeting and the August 17th, 2020 workshop. Item 9.2, the employment summary. Item 9.3, the supplementary contracts. Item 9.4, the financial summary. Does anyone need anything separated?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? Not all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, consent agenda passes. Thank you very much. We'll then move on to item 10, our WEA Trust Health Insurance Renewal for 2021. Ms. Windler.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. So we have some good news for our health insurance renewal with WEA. We have a couple of our consultants from Hayes with us tonight. Hayes is our insurance broker who worked on our behalf to negotiate a really good renewal with WEA, an impressive renewal rate, and then also rate caps for a couple years following, so in the 2022 and 2023 calendar years. So they'll talk through how the negotiations went and where they started and where we ended. They'll also talk through our loss ratio, our most recent 12 months, and then the 12 months previous, how those two compare. And then we also have one recommended plan change that they'll discuss as well. So tonight we have Chris Messert and Lorenzo Di Matteo from Hayes joining us. And I'm going to share my screen while they walk us through the insurance renewal.
Good evening, everyone.
Chris.
All right, so Chris and Lorenzo, if you want to take it away and talk through our WEA Trust Insurance Renewal.
Absolutely, appreciate it, Caitlin. Nice to see everyone again. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these slides, but as Caitlin mentioned, wanted to just kind of recap at a high level, kind of current state of things, how your plan is running, and then also talk a little bit about the negotiation. I'll lead the charge, and my colleague Lorenzo certainly will chime in with any color where appropriate. So renewal considerations, and here we have the plan overview is just to reset level. As you all know, WEA Trust is a current insurance carrier. Currently, WAWM or West Allis offers 2 plans. We call them the $500 single deductible plan or the $1,500 single deductible plan, just for easy reference. The renewal period that we're talking about that Caitlin mentioned is for January 1st, 2021. So again, just some background information there. Experience, because experience is always very relevant to renewal considerations. And when we say experience, we're really talking about the claims or the health plan claims experience as it compares to the premiums paid in. We call that a loss ratio. So looking at a couple different periods here, just to recap for you where things stand. So the most recent rolling 12 months loss ratio ran at 95.6%. Now this is looking at health plan claims from May of 19 through April of 20. I won't get into the details here, but essentially paid through June 30th. And that loss ratio was 95.6%. That means that the claims paid out, and this is keeping it simple, the claims paid out were 95.6% of the total premiums that were paid in. Now keep in mind, when we talk about this loss ratio, it's comparing the health plan claims versus the premiums. Does not include any expenses for WEA Trust. And there are a number of expenses that also relate to the renewal. So that was the most recent 12 months. If we look at the prior 12 months leading up to that, the loss ratio was 87.7%. Again, this is May 18 through April of 19. So as you can see, as I mentioned above, the claims experience has trended up about 8% for the most recent 12 compared to the prior 12. If we combine those two, the rolling 24 months loss ratio, we're looking at about 91.7%. And I will just tell you, just for additional color, generally speaking, when we're working with insurance carriers in a fully insured environment, which West Allis, West Milwaukee is with WEA Trust, most insurance carriers will tell you for a loss ratio, the target range to ensure a trend increase is around 85 to 90%. And so as we talked about, the most recent being around 95.7 was a little bit higher than what WEA would tell us they wanted to see. And therefore we were expecting, a higher renewal. But as Caitlin mentioned, we had some excellent news here. So, leading up to the renewal, one thing that we always do with insurance carriers, we don't wait till the renewal comes out. We start lobbying and negotiating, long time ahead of the actual renewal. So in the month and a half leading up to the renewal being released to us, we have plenty of conversations with WEA Trust, really lobbying for an aggressive, strong renewal, particularly, given the circumstances. WEA agreed to that, admitted they're going to be aggressive out of the door. And as I mentioned, given the loss ratio that we were seeing, Caitlin and I had a number of conversations, and just given the loss ratio, we expected a higher renewal, but thrilled to present that WEA Trust out of the gate came in aggressively with a 3% increase, which from my perspective, given how things were running, given the uncertainty with COVID, was an outstanding increase. And I kind of smiled and laughed when they presented it to me, because I told them, well, you came out with something aggressive, but just know we're going to ask for something better. So, which of course they expect. Had discussion with Caitlin and Jessica, and then had some additional discussion with WEA Trust as well, pushing for an even more aggressive renewal. But with the uncertainty of COVID, we wanted to ask them for second and third year rate caps to mitigate any risk to the district. And frankly, to help with budgeting too, because it's nice to have that certainty. And we were successful there. So from our perspective, excellent news. We were able to negotiate the 3% increase down to a 1.5% increase. And much to my surprise, even though we asked for it, WEA came back with a second and a third year rate cap, which you'll see more with newer clients out of the gate, but for an existing client, not nearly as common at all. And so they offered a second year rate cap of 8.5% and a third year rate cap of 9.9% respectively. And just out of the gate, the 1.5% increase or reduction from the 3%, depending on how you want to look at it, results in about $341,000 in additional savings between that 3 and that 1.5%. So really a reduction in increased spend there, but still substantial dollars. But I will tell you as well, the rate caps are outstanding, and just know they do not require any type of commitment from West Allis, West Milwaukee beyond year one. So there are protections in place. So if the district chooses to stay with WEA for year 2 or year 3, those protections are in place. And in the conversation I had with WEA, and there were many, they really reiterated and committed through their offer, their partnership to West Allis, West Milwaukee. They've been a partner for now 27-ish years, give or take. And I will say, and I don't say this just to say it, but they have done a nice job at service and commitment to many things, including, you know, I know this year we worked on a big project with them, and they took on some retiree billing, which is a huge win for Caitlin and Jessica. So they do things that other carriers don't do. And again, I think that's them reiterating their commitment to partnership with West Allis, West Milwaukee. Now, what I mentioned there is current state. So that increase of 1.5% with the rate caps does not assume any plan design changes whatsoever. So you can take those numbers, move on to 2021 with no change to plan design. But as we always do, we're looking for possibilities of helping the plan be better managed. And I will tell you that if you haven't heard this, pharmacy is really hot and heavy in the benefits world, has been for a couple of years. There's been some outstanding advances in the medical world. You know, so you think about it from a human perspective, that's outstanding. From a finance perspective, you know, that those advances come with significant cost. And that area that we hear a lot about is pharmacy. You're hearing about gene therapies and other very expensive meds. So we looked at, and a lot of those drugs really can be classified as specialty drugs. Currently, the plans in place at West Allis, West Milwaukee do not have a separate, as we call them, tier for specialty drugs. So we're seeing that much more commonly. So we explored it with WEA, and we're recommending a copay or a separate tier be added for specialty that is a 20% cost of the drug up to a max of $250, which will yield an additional 0.2% reduction to premiums, or about 45 grand. So I will tell you that this plan designer adding that fourth tier for specialty is almost standard place now in the market. But more importantly, because the question will be, okay, well, if we add that, is there additional exposure to our members? The answer is, generally speaking, yes. But in our conversation with WEA confirmed for us that given how their fully insured plan is managed, that even adding this RX tier in there for specialty will likely have little to no impact on members. And it's a complicated world, and I don't want to get into it, but it relates to manufacturer coupons for specialty drugs and their ability to take those to reduce member and plan cost share. So the question may be, well, if it's going to have little to no impact, you know, why are there savings? Well, it's a good question, a question we actually answered. And they told us, well, we're surprised underwriting is offer you a 0.2% reduction to premiums, but to us, it's a no-brainer. That's what WEA said to me, and I would agree with that. So we're recommending the addition of this specialty copay. It's going to take the increase from 1.5% down to 1.3% if it's agreed to. And again, it should have little to no impact on membership as we move forward.
Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
So that's all we really have in terms of our presentation for our renewal increase. Are there any questions from board members? I'm gonna stop sharing.
I just have one. Chris, could you give us an example of what a specialty medication would be?
Absolutely.
Out of curiosity.
I will just say, generally speaking, it is the drugs that are used infrequently by members that cost a lot of money. And you probably see a lot of commercials for them during prime time on TV if you have any opportunity to watch TV. And I will tell you, like Otezlas and Humiras, they are drugs that may cost $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 per script that are used to treat conditions like psoriatic arthritis. You know, that's an inflammatory condition that is very common that you see a lot of advertising about, but it could also be some, you know, oral cancer medications. Again, they're not frequently used, but when they are used, they're very expensive. So those are just some high-level examples of what a specialty drug might look like. And again, specialty spend and trend is really driving the increase in pharmaceutical costs. We're seeing consistently pharmacy spend and pharmacy claims are contributing a lot more to overall health spend. So from our perspective, we're constantly looking at tools and resources to help manage that. And we believe that at a minimum here, this is another lever that can be pulled to help manage that cost.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Jeff? Jeff, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Just want to let you know that I will have to recuse myself from this vote.
Thanks, Jeff. Kristen?
Can you just make sure I understand this? It'd be, what's the cap, the $250 fill cap, what does that mean?
That means, generally speaking, so if I have a medication, a specialty medication, I'm going to pay as a member, okay, this is just thinking about it simplistically, if that drug is $1,000 and there's a 20% coinsurance, okay, 20% of $1,000 is $200. So that would be my out-of-pocket cost for that particular drug. If that drug costs, let's say, $25,000, now I'm paying 20% of that $25,000 drug. That may seem like it could be a $5,000 spend, but I'm capped out at $250. So in that particular case, my max out of pocket for that particular script is going to be $250.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, do we know in general terms how many people might be affected by this change?
Based on our conversation with WEA, little to none because of the the programs they have in place to actually manage the pharmacy spend. And it's because behind the scenes, their PBM, pharmacy benefit manager, they take advantage of all these manufacturer coupons that are out there to actually reduce the member spend. So their comment to us was, we don't expect this to impact negatively members at all.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have to give a huge shout out to Hayes and WEA for just being really great partners for our West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District. This is an impressively low rate, and especially with our loss ratios that went up in the last 12 months from the previous 12. And I know that we have partners who are really looking out for us. So thank you for what you've done to negotiate this rate, and to WEA for wanting to stick with us and continue to work with us.
Happy to do it. We appreciate the partnership. Glad we could help.
Thanks.
No.
I just wanted to also note that this is also including the partnership for the Wellness Center. So the commitment to continue that and the reimbursement for that is also continuing with this renewal. I want to also commend Hayes and Caitlin and their team for working on this. We had a 20% increase budgeted for, so this actual increase is going to help us out significantly with our budget for this coming school year. And so thank you very much for your work on that, both your teams, and it's definitely going to help us out a lot here in the next coming years. And then with those rate caps, not every year it's an unknown of what we're going to end up with, and we're just looking at those 12-month rolling loss ratios to try to figure out, and now we can start right from the gun knowing we're not going to have to do more than this. So kudos to you guys in that work.
Again, thank you, and happy to do it. And to your point, this does reflect a current state of affairs, so this renewal does continue to include the clinic funding as it is today.
Any other questions for Caitlin and the team?
I will have to recuse myself as well. I don't know if everybody saw that.
Yeah, I did. We'll wait till we have the motion and then I'll confirm the recusals. But thank you, Bill. Thank you for reminding me about that one. Any other comments or questions for Caitlin before we go forward? Not, we'll look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Kristen, you be second? Okay. You're moved and seconded. And then any other comments or questions? We'll have recusals from Jeff and recusals from Bill.
Yep.
So all remaining board members, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you everyone for that work on that. That's amazing to get that knocked out in the budget. So, all right, so we will move on then to item 11, our workshop this evening, financial stability and efficiency, our facilities update. Mr. Eck, can you go ahead and get started?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you and good evening to everybody. So I'm going to start out with some Act 32 update. And as you know, in May of 2017, the board passed a resolution for $15.8 million. 3,000 of that was for CIP, and then 12.8 million was for Act 32 projects. And it was energy projects related to, and you can see the list here, it goes from lighting all the way to roofing, digital controls for the HVAC units as well in our buildings. We contracted with McKinstry to help us oversee that, see the projects. And all of the projects that we set out to accomplish, we did. And we actually did it a little under budget, so not all of the funds were spent. And so earlier this year, Ms. Windler and I were having a discussion about could we still spend that money that we had budgeted, but we hadn't spent yet. And we talked to the lawyers and we also talked to the DPI, and they both verified that yes, we could spend those dollars as long as we did it for projects that were originally listed in the resolution. So on this slide, you can see that we have a little summary of each of the different areas that we included in the Act 32. You can see the improvement area. You can see what we budgeted for each of those items, what the actual expenditures were. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see what the amount of money that's still left in the Act 32 update that we can spend for additional projects. Here is what we're proposing for the money that was remaining in that Act 32 fund. It's for improvement to the Nathan Hale parking lot lighting. As you may or may not know, we're reconstructing the Nathan Hale parking lot. And prior to this, the lighting was in the middle of the lots. But as we were going through this and getting updates and getting quotes for doing the lot, we discovered that the poles, the cement that went around the poles, they were not compliant anymore. They weren't big enough around in terms of diameter, and they also weren't high enough because with some of the size of the vehicles that we have today, if they were to pull forward too far, they would hit the light pole actually instead of the cement. And so, and they were older technology as well. And so what we're doing is we took all of those out of the parking lot, which will also help with our snow plowing because we won't have to go around those anymore. And we are going to put new LED lighting on poles on the grass outside of the parking lot. So not only will we have increased light because we're going with LED lighting, but that program or this project will also qualify for Focus on Energy funding. And so we're doing that, and we'll have better lighting and we'll get some money back for the project once it's completed. Then we're looking at doing the some of the roofing at Lane and then also at Jefferson. Oops. Okay, sorry. And then we'll go to Focus on Energy program. And I think most everybody is aware of that program where they provide information services and then also financial incentives for programs that you apply for or projects that you apply for that meet their return on investment. And then once that project or projects is completed, then you send them documentation that you've completed all of those projects, and then they send you a check based on the project that you did and the amount of money that the project cost. And so here you can see that there again, what we did is we do this and it reduces the amount of money that we pay in utilities each month. And then it also can improve the comfort and control of our facilities because a lot of the programs that we do are related to lighting upgrades inside the classrooms. And so as Ms. Windler and I were talking, we went through and we agreed that the amount of funds that were remaining from Focus on Energy checks that we had received but we hadn't spent was a little over $500,000. And so the way the program is set up for Focus on Energy, once you do the project and you show them the documentation that you've actually met all the requirements of the project as you described it and they approved it, then they send you a check. And when they send you the check, there are no strings attached to how you can use that money. And so we're looking at a couple of proposals here is to do some additional roofing. Because also when we look at roofing, you know, most of the time you think of roofing and you say, well, it's going to stop water intrusion. But what it also does is when we update the roofing and we redo the roofing, we increase the R value or the insulation value of our roofs as well. And so that also increases the energy efficiency of our buildings and therefore reduces the amount of electricity that we spend as well. And then we're looking at seal coating and restriping the parking lot at Walker because it's not as bad as what Nathan Hale's is, but it's pretty bad as well. And we have standing water every time that it rains. And then this is just an update on the capital improvement projects. The projects that were completed in 2019-20, we did some green energy projects here. You can see installed a new sump pump at Walker, and then we did some building automation. We not only did the design, but the engineering, and we did that in-house. We replaced the Nathan Hale boilers. We did a fire alarm replacement at Central and Pershing. And then we did an in-house security system replacement at about half of the schools. And the amount of the CIP budget for 2020-21 was $1 million, the same as last year. And what we spent that on was the Nathan Hale parking lot reconstruction. That project alone was $1 million to do both the west and the south lot. One thing I want to point out with that is that, like I said, we took out the islands that were there, and we also removed the lighting poles from there. And then what we did is there were some sidewalks on either side, and they really were sidewalks that went nowhere. We checked with building administration, custodians, and some staff that were there, and nobody used those sidewalks. So what we did is we took out the sidewalks, expanded the west lot by 4 feet on each side. And then what that did is that allowed us to change the orientation of the parking stalls from being at an angle to being straight. And what that did then is that allowed us to add 65 additional stalls in the west lot and 42 additional stalls in the south lot. And so now we'll have a little over 100 more stalls in between those two lots than what we had before. And given that when we did some core sampling before we went out for bid, and we saw that the average depth of the underlayment was 3.5 inches. And when we got the core samples back, what the recommendation was is that in some areas it should be 14 inches of base, and in other areas 15 inches of base. So by doing that, as opposed to the 3.5 inches that was there, this parking lot should last a lot longer than it did before because there should be less settling. We'll still have to do maintenance to it every year, but overall the lot should last a good 15 to 20 years. And then these are just some upcoming proposed CIP projects. And you can see we have some more roofing in there. At Franklin, the retaining wall is starting to fall down, and that's about $750,000 to replace that. We have some other parking lots, some other boiler replacements, and all of those total about $3.8 million. And those would be, unless we were to receive additional funding for this year, all of these projects would come in subsequent years to the 2020-21 fiscal year. Some of the advantages, though, if we were to have money come available this year, we could take advantage of doing some of the projects now because the schools are empty of the students. Also, if you talk with architects and construction managers, they're saying that the average cost of projects will increase 4 to 5% year over year. It also could help mitigate some of the impact of possible decreased funding in future years because as they talked about in the item before us, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the state budget in subsequent years, and therefore we don't know the exact extent of how it's going to impact our budget as well. It would also help improve the infrastructure of schools. It would allow us to be proactive versus reactive. We could also apply for any focus on energy rebates that may be available for some of the projects, and then that would help us to reduce utility expenditures if we did those projects and they were energy efficient. And with that, if you have any questions or comments.
Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question. We know the budget's is tight this year, and we're not gonna get as much as we expected due to the world. I guess this question probably is for Caitlin. Do we have places in the budget where, with things that we've saved or considering contracts we've recently negotiated, would we have money in the budget for approving these kind of projects?
I had to unmute myself. So with the WEA negotiation, where we budgeted the 20% and now have the 1.5% increase, that essentially balanced our budget. So at this point, we are balanced, and we're looking to update our salaries and benefits of our staff that are still changing, our new staff, and as staff, if anybody does leave and if we change staff at this point in the year, we're tracking those salaries and benefits in more real time than we had in the past. So with that, we always budget conservatively. So we will continue to monitor if we budget. So for example, a family plan for health insurance is about $22,000. So if somebody actually takes a single plan, that saves us, $15,000 right there. So as we continue to track those salaries and benefit changes in live time and real time for our staff, that could potentially be an area where we see additional funds if we budgeted more conservatively than becomes real. And then in addition, we have our pupil count and the budget factors that are still unknown, where normally they would be. We're in the second year of a biennial state budget, but because of COVID, we anticipate a budget repair bill from the state. So if that comes in at a higher rate than we budgeted, then in that case, we would have additional funds as well.
Also, if I may, Caitlin, also in the facilities and operations department, we had some vacancies that in custodial staff and cleaning staff that we have not filled because we didn't have the students in the building the end of last year, but then more importantly, the start of this fiscal year, those positions are still unfilled. They're budgeted for, but we haven't had anybody in those positions, so we haven't been using those funds either.
Other questions on the updates? Sure. Noah, you sure?
This came through my committee before. So
I know, I figured as much. But
he answered all my questions already.
Gary, go ahead.
So the boiler replacements at Longfellow, number jumps out, the 1.5 million. What is that? Does that consist of a full replacement?
Yes, it would be a full replacement. And it's an estimate right now, and that number, it could go down. We just don't know it. Based on what we've done before and the type of boiler we're looking at replacing, that's the estimate that we have. Sometimes when we get the new boilers in, we have to do additional pipe work. So we put that in there as well.
Okay.
Other questions and comments? All right, anything else from the committee and from the workshop?
Yes, tonight we have members of Bray Architects and CG Schmidt with us, and that they're going to do is provide us with an update on the long-range facilities master plan. And I'm going to ask Nathan Sheevy if he could share his screen so that he could share the PowerPoint with us tonight.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for the introduction, Steve. I will start sharing my screen, and then we've got a couple other Bray and CG Schmidt team members that we would like to introduce to the group. I'm Nathan Sheevy, architect and associate with Bray Architects. So glad to be with the board this evening. We also have Kara Albrecht of the Bray team on with us. Kara, if you want to announce yourself.
Hello, everybody.
And then we have a couple of CG Schmidt team members as well. Dan and Joe, I saw both of your names. Are there other CG Schmidt team members joining us tonight?
Just we two tonight. Hi, everybody. Well, you heard from from me a little
Dan.
later.
Hi, everyone, as well. I'm Joe Hoffmeyer.
I think you've met Joe before. He's been working on your projects. Joe's been helping with our capital study as well.
Yeah, sounds great. So what we have to go through with the board this evening consists of three major parts. We have an update on our facility study. We'll kind of go through some information about how we gathered information and what type of information we gathered for each of the buildings related to that facility study. We will go through a specific case study. So we will walk through the Longfellow Elementary information that we gathered as part of the facility study process, both Bray and engineer team members. And then we'll touch on, as Dan mentioned as well, some of the capital improvement plan information that the CG Schmidt team is putting or has been putting together and will continue to work to flesh out that full plan that we can utilize as part of our master plan process. So Marty, I know you mentioned that we have been meeting with administrative team members. So that's been, I think, really productive conversations over the last 2 weeks related to our facility study, CIP, and master planning process. I can go through some of the slides here. No. So reminder that both Bray and CG Schmidt started working with West Dallas, West Milwaukee at the start of the 2020 school year. You can see just a snapshot of some of the information on the screen here that we have gathered to date and kind of what's on our horizon as well. So we thought this was a really important time to connect with the board because we're at a transition point between where we're kind of gathering and summarizing information, and then where we will be moving into more exploration around solutions and options related to possible master plan paths. So again, excited to connect with the group today, and we can dive into some of our updates. Just a reminder of the project team here. As Dan mentioned, I think you've seen both Bray and CG Schmidt team members at times in the past, but there are also a handful of other individuals, Frederickson Engineering and Merman Engineering, who is now a division of MSA Engineering. They were involved in the building assessment summaries that we performed at each of the spaces, or excuse me, each of the schools. And so they are specific to an engineer discipline that way. So Frederickson involved in HVAC or mechanical reports, and then Merman involved in both plumbing and electrical reports. So along with CG Schmidt team members that focus on those building systems, both Frederickson and Merman team members walked through the buildings and crafted those discipline-specific reports as well. The other organization to note on here is MD Roffers Consulting. So I know Mark Roffers has been hard at work with his team putting together some of the enrollment projections that are currently being gathered for the district. And so those will be an important variable for our master planning process as well. I guess I could go back a screen, actually. So those enrollment projections with an updated timeline, we were originally expecting those sometime in November, those complete enrollment projections, but Mark actually gave the district good news. And so we're anticipating those between the end of September and early October to have those enrollment projections complete. So I think that sets up really well in terms of where we anticipate completion for some of our other facility study information and at a point where we can launch into our master plan process with all of the variables on the table. So the first piece that we'll talk through is just how we gathered, kind of the process or approach that we took in analyzing each of the buildings. So kind of focusing on facility study items. I will keep looking to, I don't know if it's my left or your right on the screen, but I've got the slides on the other screen here. So I'll try to keep moving back and forth between the camera and the slides. So existing building assessment, you'll see on the screen here again, kind of focused on some of our process items. So we engaged in on-site walkthroughs for each of the buildings, schools and supplementary buildings across the district. That was Bray, CG Schmidt, Frederickson, and Merman team members that walked through each of the buildings. You can see some examples on the right side of the screen here We put together drawings. We believe that it's really important to graphically represent this information as opposed to just narratively representing the information. And you'll see that in some of the CIP items that C.G. Schmidt has put together as well. Existing site plan information, just capturing, right, where in the district is this building located. Existing floor plan information, right? So how many stories, what size, what types of rooms are located within the building. And then also a building evolution summary. I know Steve has done a good job of highlighting the age of buildings across the district and some of the challenges that come along with buildings of a certain age. And so just here noting when the original construction of a building was and any significant additions that have occurred over the lifespan of that building as well. Other information that was gathered, not only architectural information, right? We talked about our Frederickson, Merman, and C.G. Schmidt team members that were analyzing plumbing, HVAC, and electrical systems. So each one of those building systems has a full report that's included in the facility study. We have summarized that information. So the summary will be included in the building section itself. And then we'll have those raw reports available as an appendix to the full facility document as well. Architectural needs. So again, noting both interior and exterior items, walls, doors, floors, ceilings, other components that way were also analyzed, and we've provided a summary of our observations at each of the buildings. Another key component of buildings is their accessibility. So the ADA, or Americans with Disability Act, is an important law that's in place to ensure that individuals do have as close to universal access to public buildings across the country as they can. Again, buildings of a certain age aren't required to automatically upgrade all of those. Some of those items are grandfathered in. So stairs at the front of a building, right? The height or length of a ramp that might be included on the interior of a building. If those are in place today, they are okay to stay in place. But if any large scale renovation or capital improvement project might be suggested at any building, we would want to take into account ADA needs that would exist for that building as well. So as part of the facility study document, we've included a executive summary of our observations related to ADA considerations, as well as a more detailed itemized list of those observations. And again, graphic information, so kind of showing where those observations occurred throughout the buildings. One of the last pieces then, I guess, of capturing existing information about the building is specific to roofs and doors. So Steve talked, right, about some of the projects that have recently been completed, capital projects related to roofing, opportunity to dramatically increase the energy performance of a building, and also could have possible positive impacts to the climate as well, right? Kind of reducing heat island effect depending on the color of what that roofing membrane would be. So summarizing again graphically, noting the different size and locations of roofs for an existing building, as well as the type of roof and the date when that roof was installed. So not any new information necessarily, but kind of captured and summarized with all of our other facility study documents that we're gathering. And then the last piece, like I mentioned, exterior doors. So a nice photo collage of where those doors are located, noted on the plan, as well as kind of categorizing those. What type of door are they? And is there any concern or consideration for the function and lifespan of that door as well? So that kind of ends our process information that we wanted to share, is how we gathered information for each of the buildings across the district. Again, we examined and made observations at both all of the educational buildings as well as supplementary buildings as well. We did not specifically focus on facilities that are rented by the district, right? Those that aren't owned by the district, but all other buildings will be captured within the facility study document. I guess I'll pause there just for a second. I'll try to look through my Brady bunch of faces on the screen. Any specific questions to that process there? Noah?
Yeah, actually not a question, more of a comment. I know oftentimes when we talk about CIP projects, even I get confused about when we did what roof project, or you know, when this building was built or what extension was put on it. So this work that has already been completed, I think, is going to be immensely useful. It may have existed somewhere, but I haven't been on the board that long, but I've never seen the maps like this that you've showing, like, you know, the sections of roofs and when they've been done. And it's confusing to not only me as a board member, but I think the community as well. Is like, how many times do we have to redo the roof on Jefferson? You know, like, don't you just do the roof and you're done with it? It's like, no, we do it in sections. So having these things, I think, is immensely useful, obviously for what we're doing, but also just moving forward with things and being able to have that all in one place is fantastic. So this is an immense amount of work, and really thank you and your teams, all the teams involved, for putting this bunch together.
Absolutely happy to do it. It wouldn't be possible at all without a ton of assistance from Steve and the rest of the facilities team as well, right? So providing existing drawings, past reports that have been gathered, right? Like you mentioned, Noah, I think really, really helpful for the district and the community at large to have all this gathered in one spot, right, with consistent graphics. But tons of props to the rest of the district team that assisted in providing the information to make this process possible. Other questions or comments before we dive into our Longfellow elementary section specifically? Well, with that, then we will dive in. Kara, if you have other comments to add here, please feel free to do so, but I'll try to click through these slides. They should look actually fairly familiar to some of the slides that you saw in our process section, but wanted to just highlight these in a bit more detail in terms of what information we gathered specifically for Longfellow and what types of items you will see potentially at other buildings within the district as well. So title page here for our Longfellow section, you can see a photograph of the existing building and then just some high level stats, right? Total building area, student enrollment in the most recent academic year, acreage of the site, number of parking stalls, and the grade configuration for the building as well. Again, some more introductory information. So you can see a couple of photos on the left side of the slide here, typical classroom space, the entry space, right, the main entrance, and then a typical corridor space. So again, just kind of gives a flavor of the aesthetics and types of rooms that exist at each of these buildings. On the right side, you'll see the first example of our building evolution diagram for Longfellow. So you can see original building here, constructed in 1927 in brown. And kind of our teal or blue color was an addition that was constructed in 1956. And then the most recent addition to Longfellow here in 1999 in the green color. So again, some buildings have many additions, right, that have come along in their history. Some have very few, if any. So again, a quick graphic way to represent that for each of the buildings in the district. Our existing site plan for Longfellow. So again, you can see here the red dashed line is the school parcel. So what is school property versus what isn't. Major streets identified. So you can see South 60th called out, as well as West Grant Street here. And then just an understanding of what the surrounding context is, right? Is there a commercial corridor nearby? Is it mainly residential? Is there other types of zoning around the building? So here for Longfellow specifically, right, you can see a lot of single family zoning, right, or small multifamily zoning that exists around the building. our existing floor plan. So Longfellow has 3 total floors. So here you can see first floor and then rooms noted for their current use. Same thing for the second floor here. And the third floor, again, calling out existing spaces and their use. First assessment in terms of observations that were made, we focus on architectural items. So again, doors, walls, windows, floors, ceilings. The text on the right side is going to be really, really tiny on the screen today. So we absolutely can share a full PDF of this draft section if it's helpful. But know that this information will be included along with all the other buildings in our full facility document as well in a digital form. So some main observations here for Longfellow, just some older flooring, right? As well as some older walls within the existing building, especially within the 1920s portion of the original building. A lot of existing windows that aren't true vision windows, right? They're kind of a fiberglass or composite window. Those were done at some point in the past because they were more energy efficient than the glass, right, of a previous age. But glass has made a ton of advancements in technology. So if there were a desire to replace windows, specifically at Longfellow or at other buildings, I think, again, there could be a pretty dramatic energy efficiency improvement and an aesthetics and an educational environment improvement if we made some changes to these windows. Other items here, again, you'll see we're calling out information that's included on the left side, so kind of numbered and bulleted items that were architectural observations, and then those that are called out in the floor plan graphic, right, with our call outs and then some colored boundaries. Are noted in that spreadsheet summary by X's. So you can see here where terrazzo flooring was included in the existing building. We've noted some cracking that was observed within that terrazzo flooring, and that's noted on the plan. We also make some observations and capture those within our spreadsheet here related to the site development. So sidewalks, playground, and parking lot areas as well. Those aren't specifically noted graphically on our site plan or on our floor plans here, but are usually more self-explanatory than some of the architectural items. So not a specific graphic call out for our site development observations. Next piece here, and again, this text is really tiny, so don't expect board members to be reading these on the screen tonight. But a snapshot of our building systems summary. So plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items. Some highlight items specific to Longfellow that the team observed. Existing plumbing piping. There is some original piping that's both galvanized and cast iron in nature. So if any improvement project or any renovation would occur within the building, would be a recommendation to upgrade that piping material within the building. HVAC item, again, Steve touched on this in his slides earlier, the recommendation to replace the boiler plant here for Longfellow. Again, I think one of the big factors here is that the existing facility is utilizes steam heat, where any new facilities we would always recommend using a hot water system for these types of boilers. So part of the cost of upgrading the boiler plant here for Longfellow could involve transitioning the type of system that heats the building. So it could be a cost consideration as well at some point in the future. Electrical items, again here, just many items related to the age of the building. So some panels that are dated, installed as part of the original building construction. So again, a recommendation to replace those if a capital project were to be undertaken here. I'll pause for just a second here as we get into our ADA summary. It may seem like we're highlighting a lot of items, right, that could be improved at Longfellow specifically, but at other buildings across the district. Again, this is not something that's an indication of poor maintenance or deferred maintenance specifically. It's really related to the age of all of these buildings. Not uncommon, right, for other districts across the state, right, across Wisconsin, across the country. Buildings of this age are just having items approach the end of their lifespan, right? So a lot of the observations that you see are really related to the age of the existing facilities. Our ADA accessibility assessment here, so some observations that we made related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Some items, right, that are more easily updated. You can see our executive summary on the left side here that just bullet points very simply some of our observations. So toilet bars, toilet grab bars, excuse me, not in proper locations or a proper length, right, could be a more simple addition to the building potentially. Providing a transaction counter at the main office that is of an ADA height, right? We need a certain size for that ADA height compliant counter in all new public buildings. So again, something that could be a more simple item that the district could remedy. Other items that are more challenging, we mentioned that Longfellow is a 3-story building. It does not contain an elevator currently. So access between first, second, and third floors are all via stairs. So to make the building fully accessible, would want to consider installing a elevator as either part of a addition or renovation within the existing building. Again, here you saw it on the right side of the last slide. And again, on the right side here, you can see we've graphically represented and called out some of those ADA observations within the building as well. So narrative summary of the information, right? X when it's noted or identified on the plans, and then that graphic identifier for the ADA observations as well. Last 2 slides here are related to the existing roofs. So you can see different colors for each of the roofs, 8 total roofs for Longfellow. And then in the key down here, noting what type of material, so a lot of EPDM roofing across the Longfellow building, and then the date of installation. So again, roofing doesn't happen all at once for buildings generally. So, right, some roofing here installed in 2017, so fairly recently, and other areas installed at a longer time in the past, right? So 1987 for this portion of the roof here. Last slide in our case study this evening, exterior doors. So again, kind of our photo collage, noting those exterior doors around the building, identifying them with a graphic call out, right? No exterior doors on the 3rd floor, but we do have an exterior door at the 2nd floor, actually, that's roof access to the 50s edition. And then narratively summarizing that information as well related to our exterior doors. So I'll pause here again for any questions. Again, it was a pretty rapid dive through that information specific to Longfellow. Again, as we said, we can provide this section individually in a digital format if that's helpful for the board, or right, be able to review these items in more detail as part of the full facility study document as well. So any specific questions or comments related there? Noah?
In your planning, when you're looking at these things, are you also taking into account things like the condition of fencing and retaining walls at each of our buildings that we have?
That is a part of our observations that we make related to the site development, right? In addition to sidewalks, exterior lighting, parking lots, we do consider those other site elements as well. So retaining walls, fences, playground equipment, other things of that nature too.
For the physical space that isn't occupied by a building, is there any thought going into best use of that space? So you mentioned playground equipment, but also possible like outdoor classroom or activities that could be utilized with, you know, whatever space that we actually have?
Hasn't been a focused conversation to date, as we've been, the team has been really focusing on gathering existing information. But I think could be a really important component of our conversations moving forward in our master plan dialogue, right? If there is a specific curriculum component or a specific grade level, or is it right across all grade levels, all buildings, right, that we would want to explore the opportunities to provide more outdoor space or more of a structured outdoor classroom, or just more organic space, right, that staff and students could use outside the building?
We did have a discussion briefly that there has been a request from the staff just to, and to look at a building to have more green space here. There's quite a few urban settings that you have almost zero lot lines on 3 sides of the building. So that is a consideration eventually when we start looking at solutions in the long term.
Okay, yeah, that's what I basically was kind of hedging at, the type of learning we want to have happen. Having those sorts of flexibilities and trying the best use of our space is definitely want to keep in mind. So I'm glad to hear that's being thought of. Lastly, I don't remember if the boiler room at Longfellow is on the first floor, if it's actually in the basement. I guess my question is, if there is a basement in the building, is that also being mapped and evaluated the same way as the learning spaces are?
It is, Noah, yes. So we have noted across all facilities if there is a basement, right, if there's any mechanical space included there. We've also noted unexcavated or crawl spaces, right? None of those specific at Longfellow, but I can think of a handful of other elementaries, right? Irving specifically, General Mitchell, that have pretty extensive crawl space or unexcavated space underneath the building with some mechanical equipment located in those. So you will see those as part of those buildings that contain those spaces, those captured within our floor plans. And were toured as part of our architectural and MEP site observations as well.
Okay, and the last question I have is regarding traffic flow. So some of our buildings have some challenges regarding pickup and drop off and safety and things like that. Is any of that being evaluated when we're looking at these building spaces?
Not specifically. We don't have a civil engineer involved. I think both the Bray and CG Schmidt teams have established an expertise, right, in educational design across the state, especially in the Milwaukee area. So I think, again, as Dan mentioned, our conversations moving forward in terms of master plan items, understanding how the drop-off pickup sequence works today, if there are any challenges, right, to a specific site, if it's challenges across all buildings. I think it's something that we definitely should be discussing and would plan on discussing as we move forward in our dialogue.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Other questions or thoughts before we transition into some of our CIP items that we have today?
Yeah, this is Gary Schultz. I just want to back up on something though. This is supposed to just be a current state of the facilities, correct?
Correct.
I don't think this part of the plan is supposed to do any looking at potential uses of the facility or other options. This is strictly one part of the plan, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, you've captured that right, Gary, and I know Dan's mentioning the same thing. So this is kind of the snapshot in time, right, of where each of the buildings are today. I think as we move forward into our master plan process, right, analyzing options or different paths, right, that the district may have in terms of how they utilize their existing buildings. It will be part of the dialogue, but in terms of specific suggestions or recommendations to making changes, right, either areas to be renovated, possible additions, adjustments to site development, not proposing those at this point, right? We will kind of capture as part of our facility study document, right? Kind of put a final stamp on it for today's snapshot in time, and then absolutely be referring to that information often, right? As we move forward into our master plan dialogue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're just gathering information from a bunch of different fronts. So Roffers has the enrollment data. Bray will be going through a capacity study just to reaffirm how many kids you can put in each school reasonably, even in modern learning environments. Where the kids are where it's growing. All of that kind of gets rolled into future solutions. And we start at a very high level with really kind of enrollment areas and how many kids can fit in the building. And the facility condition report, which is really what this is really just one factor for eventually deciding on which solutions are maybe best for the district.
other thoughts or comments from the group? Otherwise, Dan and Joe, I might turn it over to each of you.
I'm going to walk through a few slides. If you can drive, Nathan, that'd be great. So we're just going to give you a snapshot of what the end product will look like. This is a snapshot of the costs associated with the capital improvement project list. And so each building would have a summary, or this would be a summary of each building's costs associated with the items that show up on the condition report. And as we get further and further into this, it gets more and more detailed. But it's important to note that Steve and his crew and the custodial staff and the maintenance staff have done a nice job of keeping your buildings up. You walk in, they're clean, they're maintained. But over time, with the average age at 70 something, what is it, 74? I don't remember the number, Steve, but it's overwhelming after a while with all the capital replacements. So in our work putting prices together, as you can imagine, lags a little bit behind Bray's list compilation. We've been through the buildings, but it takes us a little while to price all the options, a little bit longer than just to identify them. So we'll be working behind them through the month of September to finish up putting prices on all these buildings. And we're not pricing everything getting replaced. So in other words, we go through and maybe we note that ceilings are old or in some condition. Some places really need to get repaired because they're going to fall down. So we do those repairs and put it in a good working condition. But this list won't be sort of comprehensive whole-scale replacement, really just repairs and maintenance and replacements that are needed to function. And again, this is just a snapshot of the format. And you can see that we can sort this just pretty much any way we want to. And there's a bunch of columns here that we'll go through in more detail, but we've kind of grouped these into categories so you can see at a next level glance where you would spend money at a building like Longfellow. So this mirrors the case study that Nathan just went through. So this is a work in progress. These aren't the final numbers. There's still some things on here that we need to do. We haven't done the site, for example, Noah, to add in the general and or additional items, but a number of these things have been put in there. So the broader sweeping changes like additions and things would happen with those solutions we talked about. So it gets into more and more detail. So that exterior enclosure building deficiency at 2.7 is made up of these 13 items. And you can see a couple of those that we talked about. The windows are in there just because of their condition. It's kind of buried under there, but there's some parking lot repairs and even the ADA access to the second and third floors that Nathan mentioned. So putting an elevator in, it's underneath the draft, underneath the D and the R of the draft there. So all these correspond to the items that are in Bray's report. So that center column that says survey item list, that's the number right off the report. So you can go back and say, oh, I realize where that is now, and there's a picture of it and a description of it, so that the two reports work hand in hand so you can tell exactly what you're looking at. So this is just Longfellow, kind of the 2 or 3 sheets we pulled out of that report. You know, the plumbing and mechanical and electrical items that our engineers have worked on. They, bid and buy out projects all the time, and so they've had some input from subcontractors as well as some historical costs that we put in here. So there's a number down here you can see at 1.4 million here, M1 toward the bottom. That's that boiler replacement that Steve mentioned. And what we do is we put that in today's dollars. And then there's some hidden columns here that you can use and spread out as a cash flow over a 10-year plan. And so when you got to the point where you'd be replacing that, you'd be close to that $1.5 million estimate that Steve had in a year or two. So that's kind of how we work this. We'll put a year in there that we expect to do it, or what budget year it might be needed in. And then this document that we hand over to the district is a living, breathing, rolling 10-year plan that's very easy to manipulate and change. So it's a nice tool for you as a district. And then we attach a little bit more detail so that we remember what was included. So some of the areas that are captured in narrative in the report, we have to go a little further and say, what areas are we, pulling carpet out and putting it back in because it's getting to that age, or where there's abatement underneath it. So this just gives us a little more background. So if we come back 6 months, 3 years later, it's easy for us to figure out what square footages we had assumed And it's easy to get budget prices or bids from contractors at that point as well. So all of this kind of supplements that report. And again, it lags 3-4 weeks behind getting the detailed survey done. And then at a glance on that front summary sheet, as a board, you'll be able to see what kind of investments you have really over the next 10 years in each building. And you'll be able to, in a number of ways, graphically or very obviously see where the big investments are compared to other buildings. So that's just an example. We're about, I don't know, I'd say 40% into the work that we've got to do. So we've got quite a bit of work left to do on our end to keep going and get our report finalized in September. Any questions on that, what we call the CIP list?
Dan?
Yes.
Gary Schultz. Could you go back to your last slide? I just want to be quick. So in your top item on the legend, you have classroom flooring to replace potential hot. That might identify where you could have something like asbestos?
Correct. Yep. So that unit price is different. Yep. So there's more than likely asbestos tile there. It's not a hazard right now, but if you replace it, you need to have just a different unit price because it's more expensive to take that up and replace it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I don't have the full screen on here. I don't know if you can see anybody that's raising their hand. I don't know, Steve, you have any follow-up comments at all? It's kind of our summary at this point of where we are, and then we would expect the board in October or coming up shortly after that to start to refocus a little more time on facilities. And when you've got a little more bandwidth, hopefully to deal with some other issues besides COVID and reopening.
One of the nice features as well is that if you look at what Nathan had up originally, and it showed the progression of a building of when it was originally built. One of the nice things, if you look at the bottom of those, on the bottom right-hand corner of those pages, is it'll not only show you what year that an addition was done, it'll show you what type of an addition it was. Like in this case, 1956, it was gymnasium classroom addition, but it also has the square footage of those additions when they were done as well. And I know that's one thing that some board members had asked for before that we didn't have in one place, and now we have that information as well.
Steve, this is Gary again. Could you go back to the timeline?
Yeah, I apologize. I'll skip ahead really fast. So everybody close your eyes. Don't get seasick.
Yeah, we have one at the end of the presentation as well to review.
There. So at what point in this part of the project, or maybe it's not, it'll come later, is the facilities advisory community team going to start participating?
That's one of the questions that we still have to answer in some of our internal meetings that we've been having, because we did have a rough idea of when we were going to do that, but that was prior to COVID. And so now with COVID, that changes the dynamics a little bit, and it also changed our timing a little bit. So we don't have a specific date, but that still is the plan. And like this is kind of the first step, getting an update for the board. Here's where the work that's been done. Here's where we're at. Here's what some of the next steps are. And then one of those next steps will include the FACT committee. And, but when that's going to happen yet, we don't have an exact time.
Okay.
Yeah, I know Steve, Marty, in our conversations, right, we've had a lot of dialogue about when is the right time and what type of dialogue we want to be having with the community. But yeah, Bray and CG Schmidt are committed to having those dialogues as needed as well.
Yeah, so this timeline says, you can see that first dot in October with board interaction. There'll be some education and bringing up to speed with some of the things we're already starting to look at as far as options and some of the parameters around school size, and that report would probably include Roffer's enrollment as well. So there'll be a bunch of data still beyond just the facility condition that you need to soak in to be able to understand what solutions are really proposing. So that's coming up later this year for the board.
And we should note these are tentative or suggested as well, right? We're not automatically assuming that we'll have agenda items located for the board for each of these months, October, November, and December here. But Dan, as you mentioned, I think it'd be really valuable to be connecting with the board on approximately this timeline, because it will support the other dialogues that we've been having as a consultant team, right, and with the administrative team as well.
So there's still a lot of homework for us to do to get everything put together. And that's one of the approaches or questions we have about involving the community. We've often gotten better reaction or better input after we've done some homework and been able to tell them kind of what's going on, not necessarily bring solutions right away, but certainly give them more background. So a lot of this that we're gathering now, we'd want to be able to put in front of a committee or a community group when it's well presented, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I just follow up on my comments previously. Again, I understand the point of this. I find that it's better to provide some questions that may be in process or to be in process instead of after the process is complete, in hopes that you were able to guess what things I might want to see. So that's why I was kind of giving you some of the things that I think would be important to include on those next steps. I understand this is a report on what our current facilities are looking for or looking like, and what sort of things we need to do to just maintain them and ensure that they are safe and ready for the type of education we're doing currently. And the next steps would be the type of education we would like to be doing and what would involve.
Yep, you're right on point. That's correct. That's where we're going.
Other comments or questions from the group tonight? Happy to spend as much time as we need to with this item, but I don't want to belabor things if the group is finished this evening as well. Well, with that then, we'll turn it back to Stephanie and the district team. Again, really appreciate the group making time this evening to speak with us, allowing us to present. As Dan mentioned, we know that you have a ton of other priorities right now related to the start of the school year and the start of a really unique school year. So we appreciate the opportunity to present and look forward to continuing to work with the district as well.
Thank you very much. We appreciate everything so far and looking forward to all these updates coming and all the hard work yet to come. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Steve, that was it for the update tonight?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. That is the last item on our agenda for this evening. So unless anyone has any objections, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions anyone want to hold back? If not, everyone, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other.